Thanks, Beth, for that prayer. Uh, all right. So I've written some stuff down to keep myself on track. All right, so we're just gonna get straight into it. I'm a Sheena and I'm a believer. And I'm gonna be speaking today about watching pornography as a Christian, as a Bible believing, spirit filled, water baptized, no doubt about my salvation Christian, and the impact it had on my journey and my journey that God took me on through this struggle and bondage to freedom. And this is another topic I don't hear people testifying about really outside of people saying I'm this many years porn free. Like when people are on the other side of it, which is great, but I know for a fact there are many now and have been in the church struggling and fighting with this battle alone. And through the shame that's connected to it, suffering silence. And I know because I was one of them. I was ravaged by it in the church, whilst serving, whilst worshipping, with my hands held high, singing at the top of my lungs. And then I'd go home and watch some stuff, respond accordingly. So I'm just going to rewind back a little bit, give a bit of context. So I only began exploring the world of porn whilst in recovery, believe it or not. And I come out of jail, I was in a dry house, and I can't remember exactly how long I was there for before the thought kind of started coming into my head. Oh, I wonder what kind of stuff I'd find if I looked. And my memory's not amazing, but I'm not sure about the timeline. But I remember there was a guy who lived in the dry house at the time. There was about 5, 6 of us all together. And he used to unashamedly, blatantly watch porn. And I'd knock on his door. I'd go to his door for whatever reason. And he'd casually answer the door, normal, and basically say, "What's up?" And I'd be seeing it on the telly or the laptop, whatever he's got it on. And I'd be like, "Oh, sorry," proper embarrassed. But he wasn't at all. And he'd just be like, "Nah, it's cool. What's up?" So then when I had to kind of try and look normal and carry on with whatever I was there to say, whilst trying not to look proper embarrassed, but intrigued at the same time to see what was playing. And whilst he's responding to me in conversation and also still watching it himself, it kind of allowed me to catch some glimpses. And there was a curiosity in me that I hadn't intentionally gone there myself yet. So I tried to search some stuff on my phone, but my phone had one of them, must have had one of them like kiddie restrictions on it, so it wouldn't let me. And I'm rubbish with technology, so I couldn't figure it out. So there was a communal computer in the living room. Yes, you know where this is going. So the only way I was able to access it, this growing intrigue and curiosity in me, pulling me towards it. So I'd sneak down at night and I began typing some stuff in. So that was my own personal, choiceful introduction to it. Because before this time in active addiction, I had no interest to seek out these things. Because my lifestyle, the lifestyle I was living, and some of the arenas I ended up in, I was exposed to this stuff through other people's pleasure, which disgusted me, to be fair. But some of us, speak for everyone, some of us have to do the things we got to do to get drugs through whatever means possible or use where we can. And I didn't like what it did to people and the reason why people were playing it and how I saw it affect them. It didn't look pretty or attractive at all. And outwardly, what I observed was people would change before, during, and after being exposing themselves to it. So then me coming into recovery and discovering things and seeing things in a different perspective and light from in a total different context, it felt different. It felt different to try to start to explore. So obviously, not obviously, but I ended up internally and externally experiencing some of the things that I'd witnessed. So I continued to dabble, put it like that. So maybe about a year or so later, I came to faith and I had a dramatic encounter with our Father, which I've explained in more detail in a previous talk called Sexuality. So I'm not going to go into detail about that now. If you want to know about that, watch that. But the short version is, a few weeks after saying a prayer in my church, God changed something in me which I didn't even know was possible, leaving me with the only conclusion that he's not just real, but he's a personal God, and he can do everything and anything if he wanted to. And I needed to start a fresh understanding of what I believed to be good and bad, right and wrong, because all of that became in question at that point. So I'm born again. I've got no doubt about that. But what that looks like for me, I didn't know. Of course I didn't. I've never been filled by a spirit before. I know where I've been and I know where I was in that minute. But what it looked like moving forward, only God knew. So just to make it clear, I began real recovery in 2011. I started intentionally seeking out pornography about 2012, and I was saved in 2013. And it's only just been a year that I've gotten full freedom. It's been about 1 year now since I last watched porn in any way or form. And in that time, before that point, I managed to get about 4-5 months, maybe. And towards the end, about 7-8 months, maybe, guessing without watching it. So in this time, so that's about 10 years. I hope you're hearing this now. That's about 10 years in faith, however many years in recovery. I'm not going to try and add that up. So in that time, the journey, God, with God and the relationship with him, who he showed me he was to who I thought he was, changed dramatically. The faith in me grew. He showed me different perspectives and revelations of his character. So for me, over the years, the things he showed me and told me when I was begging him to take this thing from me, to search my heart, like what's the root? I went through many different stages. I'm only going to touch on 2 of them in here. I went through many different stages, and none of them in and of themselves was the answer. But last week, on the meeting last week, Sid mentioned in a share back that the Bible's written for me, but it's not about me. And it kind of blew my mind. I've never heard it explained like that, because I felt like the stories and accounts of the people in the Bible were to highlight human shortcomings, like how fickle we are. And I guess to understand ourselves better. So maybe not to give ourselves such a hard time. And then, like, in spite of all that, his grace and his mercy over some of the people in the Bible is like why I need God kind of thing. And why I need God, something like that, which of course that's helpful. I'm not saying that's not true. We can get that from it when we see and we read that there's not one person that is perfect in the Bible apart from Christ himself. or live the perfect life. But the whole Bible is about who he is and what he did to reconcile us back to himself, how good he is, his true character, the height of his grace and the depth of his mercy. Who does such things for these flawed people? What kind of God not only died for us, me and you, but rose again so we could walk in the same power that gives us a fresh start before our Creator? It's about him. So some of these stages, I'm not going to read that. I'm going to touch on a couple of these stages that I went through. So one of these stages was despair and repenting and beating myself up. So for those in 12-step fellowship, for me, it was like doing inventory without the power of God to change what I kept experiencing. I'm seeing the same thing come up over and over again, being reminded of what a failure I am in this area. And because I can't stop, and more importantly, nothing's changing and seeing no movement. So the shame attached to that, to it, because of the shame attached to pornography, because of the nature of what it is. But not only just that, but his spirit is in me. And what does the Holy Spirit do? He convicts those of sin, righteousness, and judgment. So there's no way I can justify watching or engaging with such things. The Bible says everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery in your heart. And with porn, there's no grace in I didn't mean to look. It was an accident. I was intentionally seeking these platforms to feed and explore a lustful desire, full stop. And on top of that, I'm in church and I'm serving. And at first, I'm hoping I can deal with it myself. Because who do you talk to about this gear? How do you start that conversation? And never mind that, how do you open up about something like that whilst also trying to maintain the appearance of what I thought a Christian should be? So I'm too shameful to tell anyone until I was forced to in the end, because I got scared. I was scared of the content I was watching and how unsatisfied I was becoming. And it would take longer and longer to get the desired effects of being on there. I was numb to a lot of it. Initially, it would impact me quite quickly. And unless, obviously, if I took a break for a minute, at first, it would impact me quickly and respond however. And then I'd spend hours scrolling and searching and tweaking the searches. And I got scared. Like, where could this lead? Because this stuff has an insidious and insatiable appetite. And because of that, it's naturally progressive. If you liken it to using drugs at first, it hits quick and it's instant. And then the more you use, the more tolerance you build, and more is needed to get the desired effect. And I can't speak for you, but I realized talking about drugs, if I mix a bit of this and I mix a bit of that together, then you can get where you want to get quicker. And then your tolerance builds there again, obviously. So I'd smoke a bit of this, I'd inject a bit of that, I'd be drinking a bit of that, I'd be munching on whoever's medication like Smarties, just to get a glimpse of what I initially got when I first experienced it from a few lines and a bottle of cider. And it's the same with pornography, but it's darker. So I'm praying and I'm crying out and I'm reading the Bible, I'm watching sermons. And through somewhere in that, I come across the story of David and Bathsheba. And I'm jumping all over the place, but it is what it is. Take what you can from it. I came across the story of David and Bathsheba come to my attention. And I was asking God, what do I have to do to change it? What's the problem? And I was one of those Christians at the time. I was in the mindset that I don't have to go to church every week. That's just a religious behavior. Being there, whether I'm there or not, I'm still a child of God. He's with me everywhere, which is true. But what was highlighted to me in the story of David and Bathsheba at the time was the fact that in that story, the other soldiers were out at war, they were fighting, but David stayed home. And I don't know why he wasn't out with his army, he wasn't leading his army, but basically, because David wasn't where he was meant to be, he was left idle, chilling in his house with nothing to do. And whilst he was doing this, that's when he spotted Bathsheba and basically started perving on her. Not just about another man's wife, but another trusted one of his soldiers' wife. And because he wasn't where he was meant to be, the opportunity for that came about, which I translated at the time in my life to be that kind of gear, the thoughts to watch porn and getting in all that kind of, it used to hit me harder at a weekend. It was while I was chilling at home on a weekend that I would fall into it. And I thought, if I was at church, maybe I'd have less time on my hands to fall into it. Maybe if I was there and I was around his word and I was around his people, I might get a break from that habit, or it might change, or he might take it. So I did that for a bit and it did help. But eventually I fell back into it. But since then, I have always tended a church regularly from that point. And another thing that happened was once all I tried didn't work, I knew I had to speak to someone because I didn't know what else to do. And so another significant encounter that I had was when I was in a spiral of shame, in dark moments, which would happen quite regularly, especially at the beginning. And I'd normally try and hide from God. And I'd struggle to read the Bible because I felt like a hypocrite. Or the more I was doing what I was doing, the less I'd want to read the Bible. And sometimes I'd go to read the Bible and all kinds of filthy images would start flashing through my head as soon as I'd pick it up. I wouldn't pray as much. And kind of consciously and subconsciously, I'd think, what's the point in me praying and reading the Bible again when I know I'm not done yet in this episode, in this, whatever you want to call it? And why do it now if I'm not going to stop watching yet? I'm going to watch it later. I'm going to watch it tomorrow. I know I'm not done. In amongst that, God showed me he was with me in my shame. And I remember it clearly. After many times of falling into it, feeling shameful, turning away from him, being scared, thinking that he didn't like me or couldn't look at me. I remember I was sat on my sofa and I was twisted up in shame, almost tangible. And I just felt his presence strongly. And it didn't make sense because it was kind of like, it wasn't an open conversation, but it's kind of like, you can't be here. Like, you're not meant to be talking to God, you know. You're not meant to be here. I've been bad. I've been doing some bad stuff. But he was. And as I kind of accepted in that moment that he was with me, then I was kind of like, don't look at me. And it wasn't necessarily words that come out my mouth or I could see him. But I knew he was with me and I knew he weren't judging me. And he just sat with me. He wasn't turning his face away, which is what I believe God did when I'd done bad things, or when I felt I'd let him down in them moments. He was just there with me. And it reminds me of in the garden with Adam and Eve, when Adam and Eve hid from God because of the shame that they felt, because they knew that they'd sinned. They knew they'd disobeyed him. And what they'd done what he told them not to do, and allowed themselves to be deceived and listened and trusted someone else rather than God. And God knew exactly where they were. And what did he do? He engaged in conversation with them. He made them talk to him about what had just happened. Sin separated man from God, and it took something from them, their intimacy with God, because all they could see now was their shame, and all they could feel was their fear. But God, even in the fall of man, still protected them. He gave them clothes. He prevented them from staying in the garden so they couldn't eat from the tree of life after they'd eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that's a whole sermon in itself. And that blew my mind. I thought God couldn't bear to look at me whilst I was sinning and when I was falling short because of who I thought he was. But he's my father, right? I'm his daughter. And most of you have probably seen that meme. Talking about a meme in a talk, but it's all serious and that. Most of you have probably seen that meme where it says something like, religion says, I've messed up. My dad's going to kill me. And the gospel says, I've messed up. I better call my dad. And in amongst all this, the relationship was becoming more like that. In amongst it all. So that's just two brief moments in about 10 years. That's just two brief moments on what God was doing with a broken vessel stuck in the snare of porn. So a few other things that I did in that time, a few other things I tried in that time. I told a woman originally that was walking alongside me, and she was at the start, and we would repent every week, no holds barred. It's kind of the same with that infantry stuff. I keep seeing this thing, so it half broke me at the same time, but we repented every week. So I got taught how to repent during this time. I told another friend who started praying for me. Eventually we had a little WhatsApp group with two other sisters on it, and we began fasting and confessing and praying and encouraging each other each week. There's 4 of us now, we still do that to this day. A few years in on it, I told my pastor, and he began meeting up with me more often, and he would help make some sense of it and the gear that was under it, rather than focusing on the continuous failure, which would just put me into a deep, mad spiral of shame. He would encourage me. He would speak about the word. He would suggest some things. And that's part of the reason why I have such a beautiful relationship with him now. And if I can talk to my pastor about porn, then I can talk to him about anything. And I do. And I've tried a couple of like Christian online, like to break through from kind of porn sites. And I know I've said this a few times, but I think it's important. Like, none of these things were the answer. I never found a method that fixed it or took it away. One day, a Christian organization came to our church and they were doing a talk about the dangers of the internet and our young people. And it was educating people and giving statistics on how many young people, how many Christians, how many people in church actually are currently watching porn from the studies that they did. And obviously, that's not even capturing a lot, but it was nuts. And how easy it was for children to access the internet. And after that, it wasn't even that. But since that day, I haven't watched it. I've been tempted. I've been tempted and I've been close a few times. And even just the other day, a few weeks ago, actually, I think it was after I agreed to do this talk, to be fair. A few weeks ago, I was sitting minding my own business at home. And some thoughts just started flooding my mind from one minute to the other. And I was close. So I messaged my little group, messaged a few sisters, got up, broke out speaking in tongues, started praying, banged on some worship, started worshiping loud. A few sisters were sending me voice notes. And the thoughts went. And not the last little miracle, the last little bit. The first few years of watching porn and being in it, I used to get daily, every other day, daily, weekly, the images that I was watching flooding my mind, flooding it. It's almost like there was nothing I could do about it. Everything that I'd watch would replay and play out, interestingly enough. So imagine, play out what I was seeing on a regular basis. And one of the times I was broken in it again and I cried out to him again. He wiped my mind fully. He wiped it where I'd just be minding my own business, going about my day, and these things would flood in. He took it. And that's even when I'd fall back into it, the images would never replay again. I'd have to try really hard. Or, like I said the other day, every now and then for certain situations, they drop like that. But the continuous images never come back like that, torturous again. So we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the power of our testimony. And I pray that you have heard some of God's character and how he transforms, however long it takes, even when we don't see it, he's working. I'd leave it there.